The daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. In researching these angels or watchers, it can be clearly referenced back that they were the Anunnaki gods of history. It is simply our perception of what is real that often limits us from the truth. This divergence of purpose by these two magicians would lead Edward Kelly deep into the occult study of black magic and necromancy and sharply divide the two men. John Dee firmly opposed black magic and repeatedly warned Edward Kelly of the dangers of it. John Dee made the decision to disassociate himself from Edward Kelly after he began digging up corpses from the graveyards. With the help of Paul Waring, Kelly started summoning the spirits of the dead in the graveyard of St. Leonard's Church in the village of Walton le Dale in Lancashire, England. The days of working with Enochian white magic were over for Edward Kelly, as his focus turned to mastering the art of black magic. Two great alchemists would choose between using their knowledge and power for either darkness or light, and become part of a struggle that has gone on for thousands of years in our universe. In the Enochian writings translated by John Dee, he is told that there is an ancient battle being fought between the forces of darkness and light, and that this Enochian magic he is learning is part of protecting what are known as the Great Watchtowers. These watchtowers guard against the evil that exists just beyond our universe, which threatens to tear it apart with chaos. The demon who resides there and controls the realm is known as Choronzon, Dweller of the Abyss. The Enochian angels, spoken through Gabriel, explain that this great threat that exists just beyond the bounds of our universe is being held back by 4 watchtowers that protect against what's known as the apocalypse of darkness from invading Earth. John Dee is warned repeatedly of this grave danger and told to use this Enochian language and knowledge only for good and to better humanity, for in the wrong hands it could be disastrous. John Dee and Edward Kelly would not be the ones to open up the gates of the apocalypse. In fact, John Dee may have stopped Kelly from allowing this evil ritual to transpire. Just like in Lord of the Rings, these two wizards of our timeline represented the great struggle being waged between the forces of good and the forces of evil prevailing. I give great thanks to all that John Dee did, even if much of it will never be fully known or appreciated. All of the work done by John Dee and Edward Kelly would pave the way for another inspiring alchemist who would accomplish what Edward Kelly failed to do and alter the course of our future. Several years after disassociating with John Dee, Edward Kelly would end up imprisoned by the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II of Hungary, who was also searching for the Philosopher's Stone and the secrets to alchemy. Rudolf imprisoned Edward Kelly until he could successfully create gold from base metals. Kelly never ended up being successful and spent most of the later years of his life locked in the prison cell of a castle. It seems karma finally caught up with Kelly in the end. These events expose the truth about powerful men, kings, and secret societies who have all lusted to unlock the secrets of alchemy and the power of the Philosopher's Stone. This would mark the end of Edward Kelly's story, but his practice of black magic and necromancy, along with John Dee's Enochian knowledge, would allow the rise of another powerful alchemist and magician years later, known as Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley was born in 1875 to a wealthy family in Warwickshire, England, who considered themselves radical Protestants. They hoped he would follow in their footsteps with the church and lectured him repeatedly on what to do and what not to do based on its values. Over time, Crowley began to greatly resent religion and sought another outlet. Aleister Crowley, from an early age, considered himself different than the rest and felt he was a prophet of the coming Aeon of Horus. Crowley spent considerable amounts of time studying all of the alchemy work that had been done by John Dee and Edward Kelly previously. The secrets of alchemy became his obsession, and he pored over every piece of writing written about the subject he could get his hands on. From the very beginning, unsettling thoughts ruled Crowley's life, and he took on the sinister label of the Beast 666 as a symbol representing himself. Anyone who looks into that number and what the term beast means knows it is symbolic for Satan or the devil. Crowley considered himself the new Messiah and wanted to replace Christianity with his own religion he called Thelema. The path following this ideology would ultimately lead Crowley to his own demise and corruption. For the majority of his early life, Crowley carefully studied the work done by John Dee, Edward Kelly, and the teachings of Enoch in the hopes that he could accomplish what they did not. Crowley was convinced that all the answers he sought could be found within the pyramids of Giza and contacting the ancient gods. In 1904, Crowley was married to Rose Edith Kelly, where they traveled to Cairo, Egypt for their honeymoon, claiming to be a prince and princess. While spending a night in the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid of Giza, Crowley performed a ritual known as the Bornless Ritual on his wife, where she entered into a trance state and began speaking as the god of Horus to him. During the next several months, Crowley, using his wife in rituals, continued to speak to these gods, and on April 8th, made contact with a great being known as Aiwass. Crowley wrote this about the being known as Aiwass. No forger could have prepared so complex a set of numerical and literal puzzles. I was bound to admit that Aiwass had shown a knowledge of the Kabbalah immeasurably superior to my own. Over the course of 3 days, Crowley transcribed everything that the being Aiwass told him and compiled what is known as the Book of the Law. The Book of the Law explained that humanity was entering a new aeon and that Crowley was to become its prophet. It explained that moral law would once again rise and become dominant, where people would begin to follow their free will and higher selves. These teachings from Aiwass or Horus echo the great serpent knowledge that has been fought over for thousands of years here. This represents the seemingly never-ending struggle of knowledge versus power, and speaks about a time when mankind would once again find the light of their higher consciousness. After Crowley translated the famous Book of the Law, he began to resent its words and teachings. Immediately upon reading them, he was greatly disappointed, as they were not what he had hoped to be spoken to him, considering he thought himself as the Beast 666, or bringer of the apocalypse. Crowley believed he was the incarnation of Edward Kelly, his greatest inspiration, and thought he was destined for much higher purpose. The Book of the Law, along with instructions given to him by Aiwass, stated that Crowley was to devote his life to the path of light and to these higher teachings, and to isolate himself on an island where he could study and translate the text into all the world's languages. Upon hearing his intended goal and path, Crowley grew frustrated with the teachings of the Book of the Law and began to ignore their message more and more, and the specific path for how they were supposed to be spread. He threw the manuscript aside and changed his focus, away from Horus and Aiwass and the Enochian knowledge he'd been given, but instead to focus on acquiring great power and the change he felt was needed in the world. Crowley was frustrated with the state of society and used his vast knowledge of alchemy acquired to instead practice black magic and necromancy. This common theme of being given great power only to use it for evil is rampant all throughout our history and is meant to be a striking reminder for us and the ultimate lesson. Those who are not pure of heart and intention will nearly always become corrupted by the demiurges of greed and power. On December 6, 1909, Aleister Crowley traveled to Algeria, Africa, where on a mountaintop above the Sahara Desert, he successfully performed a powerful dark magic ritual to the demon known as Khoronzon. Instead of following the path of light and this Enochian wisdom, Crowley turned to contacting this demon Khoronzon, who took Crowley and possessed his mind in exchange for opening up the gates of darkness. Crowley was only successful in this powerful ritual because he had followed much of Edward Kelly's previous black magic work that he had left unfinished. This black magic ritual allowed an opening up the gates of the apocalypse, which had been protected by the Enochian angels for thousands of years. In the Emerald Tablets, Thoth talks about how he was permitted to glimpse into these gates of chaos just beyond our universe, and states that evil exists there beyond our comprehension. Now just imagine what would happen if those gates were opened momentarily to allow these demonic dark forces in. The year 1909 will live in infamy and must be remembered as a critical moment when great darkness was allowed into this realm, which would lead to worldwide wars and mass human deaths. Aleister Crowley died in 1947, right after World War II, just as the evil done by the Nazis was finally being vanquished from Europe. These parasitic Archon beings allowed into this dimension by Edward Kelly and Aleister Crowley would lead to the senseless slaughters seen during World War I and II, where over 100 million human beings were killed. These Archon demons became the great puppeteers behind the war tyrants of Hitler, Mussolini, and countless other leaders as they fought for control of the world. This time period was known as the Apocalypse, which reigned in the last days of Pisces, before the eventual rebirth of consciousness in mankind years later, like a rising phoenix out of its former self. Great battles have raged on Earth between the serpent knowledge of Enoch and Enki and the warring superpowers of the Eagle and Enlil, controlled by these Archons. The name Archon means Lord or Ruler, and is extensively mentioned in the Nag Hammadi scriptures, the Hypothesis of the Archon chapter, which is another writing from Enoch. There have been countless references in society back to alchemists who became corrupted by black magic, and many of them may be actually referencing Edward Kelly and Aleister Crowley. All of this shows that powerful magicians of the past have had profound effects on our timeline. Much of this will seem like completely fiction to most, but I encourage anyone to simply do some research for themselves on John Dee, Edward Kelly, and Aleister Crowley, and see the truth about their deep occult knowledge of magic and alchemy. Look all around you on television shows, movies, and games, and quickly you will see that the truth about this secret world of magicians, alchemists, and sorcerers is screaming to be heard. Remember, the truth is often stranger than fiction.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. And so it is to the printing press, to the recorder of man's deeds, the keeper of his conscience, the courier of his news, that we look for strength and assistance, confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be, free and independent.